Well, good morning. It is time for Ask the Pastor. And today we have a really good question from Nancy Goodyear. And it has to do with the books of the Bible and how they came to be connected together in what we call the canon. And I think it's a good subject because, that question comes up because we always hear about other books that are out there and they're not about the Bible. They're not included in the Bible. And we hear the stuff about the Apocrypha, which we'll talk about in this video as well. So I'm going to primarily focus on the New Testament because that's pretty much what I know. I don't know a lot about Old Testament stuff, as most of you know. So there are 27 books in the New Testament. There's the four Gospels. There's Acts and all the letters of Peter and Hebrews and Revelation and all that. And so how did they get together? What was the criteria used to put those letters together, those letters and those writings and those stories together? And it really boils down to four points that they used. Now, we need to go back in history as well. We need to go back to like the 4th century or even before that. There were many places that certain books of the Bible were used and certain ones weren't. And that went on through, the 2nd century, 3rd century, and by the time the 4th century came around, the books of the Bible had been pretty much established as they are now, other than a couple of additions. But it wasn't formalized until the late 4th centuries at one of the councils, and I don't know which one it is because I got a headache reading through the list of councils and what they did. But the basic criteria that they used to make sure that the letters were authentic and everything, and made them into the canon, were pretty simple. The first criteria that they used is apostolicity, which is a big word for meaning, was it written by an apostle? So they looked at the writings, and let's use Matthew for an example. He was an apostle, so they automatically included that into the Bible. So if it was written by an apostle, Peter would be another good example of that. They were included with them. If they could in some way at least authenticate it, because obviously some of the books were not written by one of the apostles. But that was one of the criteria that they used. One of the others is universal acceptance. Were these books that were proposed to be in the canon used widely by the church? So the books that we have currently have been used widely for, greater part of 2 millennium. With some exceptions here and there. The book of Revelations wasn't always used a lot, and neither was Hebrews, and we can talk about them a little bit later. But for the most part, if the books were used and accepted by a majority of the people, that they would then consider them to be authentic to the Christian witness. One of the other criteria is liturgical use. Were they used in churches? Pretty simple. Were they using the readings and the writings from Paul, the apostles, Luke, John, whatever? Were they using them in the churches? And so if the answer was yes to them, they were included. And the last one is probably the most important one, and it's consistency. Is the message from the Gospels to the writings of Paul and Luke and John and Peter and Revelation and Hebrew, were they consistent? Or did they go off in some crazy tangent? So the message had to be consistent. So you have apostolicity, was it written by an apostle? Universal acceptance, liturgical use, and consistency were the 4 main criteria that were used to develop the books. So you hear sometimes out there, there's a Gospel of Thomas that you hear about. And so that is not included in there, although it's got some really good information in there, and it's worth a quick read because it's not very long. It's a bunch of sayings of Jesus. You hear about that one, and why is that not included in the canon? One, it's believed it was written well into the 2nd century, and 2, they can't verify that it was actually written by Thomas the Apostle. So it doesn't have that apostolicity, doesn't meet that criteria. And then also the message is a little wonky. It doesn't really fit into the rest of the liturgical stuff. Wasn't used in churches, and it wasn't universally accepted. So, you see those books out there, and that's a part of why some books are not included. Hebrews and Revelation are a different set of circumstances all on their own. We do not know who wrote the book of Hebrew. We don't even really have a clue. Most of the other ones, we have a pretty good idea about who they were written by. But we have no idea who the author of Hebrews was. It could be Paul. It could have been one of the apostles. It could have been Barnabas. It could have been Apollos. It could have been anybody. So it didn't meet that apostolicity criteria, but it was used relatively universally. It was used in churches, and it was used within the services as well. So it met some of the criteria, but not all of them. And then you have the book of Revelation, which is just weird, and we all know that. And it says it was written by John, so it meets that apostolicity criteria, but the message is not consistent because it's a different writing style, apocalyptic writing style. So it doesn't really meet that criteria. But when they were trying to figure out which books to go in there, some people wanted Hebrews in there and Revelation out. Some people wanted Revelation and Hebrews. Some people wanted both in there. So there was this great debate, and it finally came down to, of course, this is guided by the Holy Spirit. A gentleman's agreement is we will allow the book of Hebrews to be put in if you allow the book of Revelations to put in. And so that's how that got there. The last thing I want to talk about is the Apocrypha. Now, these are books that are intertestamental. So they were written between the writings of the Old Testament and the writings of the New Testament. And they're not included in the Christian canon. If you pick up any type of Bible that's from a Protestant church, you will not find them. So we're talking about books like Ecclesiastes, Tobit, Maccabees, those types of books. You will find them in the Catholic Bible, and they are a part of that canon. And so this is kind of confusing as to why are they a part of the Bible, why are they not part of the Bible, and all of those. And it boils down to which Hebrew text that was accepted at the time. So the Masoretic text, which is the Hebrew writing of the Bible, was accepted by the Catholic Church as the authoritative writing. The Masoretic text included the Apocrypha. The other text that was written is called the Septuagint, which is the Greek translation of the Old Testament, and that did not include the Apocrypha. And so your Protestant churches in way back when and other groups did not accept, or they did accept the Septuagint as the authoritative writings. So, I mean, it's a really simple explanation, but that's what it really boils down to, is what writing of the New Testament was accepted as authoritative. We could talk for days about how the Bible was put together, how the Gospels were put together, and all those things. Those are fun topics to look at. But the basics that I want you to know is way back in the 4th century, they used the criteria of apostolicity, universal acceptance, liturgical use, and consistency as to why the letters were put in the Bible. Now, that's not to say that some of the letters in our Bible are not disputed. We know that some of the letters from Paul were not written by Paul. We get that. But that should not hurt our faith or our understanding of the writing. What we need to look at is the big picture, is that God gave us this writing in the form that we have to speak about universal truths about God. Pretty simple. God gave us in the form. So, for instance, the Gospel of Matthew, was it written by Matthew? We can't say that with certainty that it was, but should that matter to us? Should that break down our faith and cause us a crisis? Probably not. We need to kind of lighten up in that a little bit. It's authoritative because it's what God wanted for us to have. And so when I look at the Bible and I see the books that are in there, when there's the disputed letters of the Pauline letters, I don't let that fluster me, because I know God wanted me to have the words as they are. Nancy, I hope that answers your question and probably brings up a whole bunch more. But you can always send in your questions to Ask the Pastor at the website or at the email address at the bottom of the screen, and we can go from there. Thank you for your time, and we'll do this again later in the week when we got a really good and tough question that's going to challenge your faith, but I invite you to listen to it. So that's just like a little tease for you. So with that, everybody have a blessed day, and we'll see you later in the week. Take care. Bye.